like to welcome Jack Thatcher. I'll just do a profile before I get Jack up here to speak. Jack's going to do a presentation for Voyaging with the Ancestors. He's a traditional voyager and navigator of many years' experience. He learned traditional navigation under the tutelage of Master Navigator Mo Pio from Sutherwell Island in Micronesia. It's part of the modern day renaissance of traditional voyaging. He's a navigator for the Waka Te Aurere and his sister Waka Ngāhi Raka, and is part of the team planning a historically significant voyage to Rapa Nui, Easter Island, later this year. So with that, I'd like to welcome Jack Thatcher to the stage.
Ai, kia ora no tātou. Ai, te tuatahi kami atu ki tō tātou nei rangatira, kua whakatau ia mai mātou o tātou, kei roto e tēnei o tātou whare, mo tēnei kaupapa. Tēnei mi atu ki awe te rangatira. Te ho. Tuarua, kia koutou ko haro mai nei ki te whakarongo ki ngā pōrero e pāna ki atu nei kaupapa. Voyaging with the Ancestors. O tēnei he mihi nui kia koutou katoa. I haven't actually got a presentation. I sailed down to Ruawa last weekend to take part in the Transit of Venus this week. So and I had a little one of those things you plug into the computer and thought the wrong one, so kept away. This is the second time for Janturangi that I've done that. I came down for some kids things, kids programs about a month ago, did the same thing there. So to him I'm probably creating a little bit of a tradition of forgetting things. Anyway, I'm here to talk about voyaging with our ancestors. To be absolutely honest, I wouldn't know what it would be like to be voyaging with our ancestors. But what I can say is that I can talk to you about my own experiences and following in the footsteps of our ancestors. I suppose that's a better way of looking at it, because when we go out there voyaging today, you know, we go out there and even though we talk about having I should say sailing by the stars and all that sort of thing, we still have flash gear on board, the GPS and all that sort of stuff. Good old maritime New Zealand won't let us go without them. So we do have a person on board that monitors all that sort of stuff. My job though is to guide our waka, I suppose, you know, in a certain way by the stars. So I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. I just want to go back to that picture you saw of I suppose the whole Pacific and our tupuna and how they came from Southeast Asia across the Pacific and to settle the whole of Polynesia. You know, an ocean, a third the size of the planet. So it takes up a third of the planet's surface area. And I was having a chat with some people the other day in regard to that. You know, about just how amazing that was for I think it's about 7,500 years ago, with the DNA and the archaeology stuff, that they look at our ancestors leaving Southeast Asia about 7,500 years ago, and they came down through, you know, those island chains until they eventually got to I suppose the Solomon Islands, that particular area. So when you're coming down through that way, you can see the next place you're going to. So if you're going to the next island, which is just slightly more east than the last one, and you know, then you keep going, and you keep going until you get to a little expanse that's slightly a bit longer in terms of distance between one island to the next. And as you're coming down through the way, you're developing, I suppose, technology around, this is what I was asked to do with our kids just this week, talk to them about the science of voyaging. And voyaging definitely is a science. And just because you're an ancient people doesn't mean that you don't have knowledge that could be considered science and mathematics. So our ancestors came down through those areas, and they probably started off building rafts across, small areas of water. And then eventually they get to places that are, like I said, that are a little bit longer, and then they have to cross, so they build dugout canoes. And they get to some places where it's a little more bumpy with waves, and they stick an outrigger on it. Then they get to some really large expanses of water, it might be 50, 60 miles, but hey, you can still see something over there. And they stick a couple of canoes together, paddle across. Then they decide, damn, this is getting really tiring. Let's think of something else to do. So they pop a sail, and before you know it, they're sailing around those shorter expanses, backwards and forwards, and creating little communities around them. And eventually they get to places like the Santa Cruz Islands. I think that's the last place that's where we have our last version, I suppose, of those original peoples, because there's a Polynesian little community in the Santa Cruz Islands. Well, Santa Cruz Island, I think it is. And from there, the distances got quite long. They had to cross about a 500-mile gap to get to Fiji and Samoa and Tonga. And what we know is that the Polynesian civilization, as we know it, developed there. About 1,500 years before Christ, they landed there and they lived there. And I read a book by a guy called Ben Finney. And what he said was, for some reason, they stopped voyaging for 1,000 years. Now, I happen to become good friends with him over the years. He's one of the guys that formed the Polynesian Voyaging Society that built the Wakahoku layer, that sailed around the Pacific, eventually coming down here and igniting, I suppose, a desire to want to relearn all of those mātauranga that had been lost to us in terms of voyaging over the oceans. Now, we all knew that we came from Hawaii up in the oceans, but we hadn't done it for hundreds of years. So what Ben told me was that he didn't really believe they had actually stopped. And we had this little conversation over wine or two one evening with Lionel Thompson. And what we decided was that leading up to then, 500 miles would only take you a week to cross. That's what it takes us these days to cross that sort of extent. But when you get into Samoa, Tonga, and Fiji, in that area there, you've got roll islands, you fill them up with people, and eventually, you're starting to look for more land. So there's always been somewhere east, I should say. Now, the next place that they populated was the Marquesas Islands, 2,500 miles away. Now that's a really long distance to try and bridge. And you're going into the wind. Now, if I just step back from this and talk about the ancient, I suppose the theories that came out about the ability of our people to populate the Pacific. More modern historians have said that originally in the 60s, I think they were saying things like, we accidentally found islands, that we bumped into them, or that our people were blown off course from storms and they bumped into islands and settled them, but they didn't have the ability to go back. So then how did they settle them? That's a question that one should ask those guys, or should have asked them back in those days. So the reality is that 2,500 mile gap just took them 1,000 years to bridge it. But in that 1,000 years, they developed all of the necessary tools that they would need, not to conquer the Pacific Ocean, but to populate it and become one with it. And so that 1,000 years that it took them to get to the Marquesas Islands, I don't know, I wish I had a map, but the Marquesas Islands is, you've got the Society Islands of Tahiti, you've got the Tuamotu Islands with, where's the place where they blow up the bombs? Mururoa. And then just above there you've got the Marquesas Islands. Marquesas Islands is about 800 miles from Tahiti. to the northeast. So they got across there, it took them 1,000 years, and they did it like this. Zigzagging backwards and forwards, because that's the only way that you can actually sail into the wind. But whilst they were sailing, they also found times when they had favourable winds, and times of year when those favourable winds were more, not predominant maybe, but they were more frequent. And so you wait for those times, you get a good push out, and then there's less of the zigzagging going on. Now you might say, well, why did it take 1,000 years? If you look at what they had to do, bridging a 2,000 mile gap for a Stone Age people, they were Stone Age people. They had dug out holes. This waka down here is a more modern version of probably what they had back in those days. There's a higher, the tipairua, there's a higher technological advance in waka. Those are the sort of waka that Cook and Co saw up in the islands. Now we're talking almost 2,000 years before that. They're trying to bridge that gap. So they were probably a little, well, less intricate in their design. But eventually they got down to a point where the designs that they made enabled them to bridge that gap. So Toheodol said we came from the Americas because we couldn't sail the windward. And he proved that you could do that. He built a balsa wood raft, drifted across, landed in the Tuamotu Islands. Yeah. Sorry, I have to say it like that. So you come into the Tuamotu Islands, and you arrive there. And that was the basis for him really, for his theory of our coming from the Americas. Now, to back that up, the kumara and the yams come from the Americas. So it had to be true. Now, the other side of this is, why would a Stone Age people uplift their families? Because the next bunch of islands is like 3,000 miles away. You've got East Island's pretty close, about 2,700 miles away from the coast of Chile. So why would our people come from the Americas, a huge ass continent? You're never going to fill it up with people, I mean. You've got all the kaya and stuff that you want there. It might be a bit dangerous with all the jaguars and things running around the place. Or convictors, I don't know what the hell they got there, but I don't think that would be enough to scare a people off that would be willing to go out into the great expense of nothing and never come back. Because that's what they were suggesting, that they would take your families, your wife, your child, and you'd head out on a balsa wood raft and slide off into the Pacific, hoping to bump into some islands. Now, tell me, would you do that? I wouldn't. I would go from the other end. I'd go and start in Samoa, and I'd load up enough kai on my waka for a week, and I'd zigzag into the wind for a few days, get out as far as I could, running out of water and food, and say, uh-oh, better go home. Turn around, take me a day to get home. It makes much more sense to actually go out and explore in that particular fashion than it does to head off without any knowledge of what's in front of you, without any ability to then go home. I'm not going to go out and die in the middle of the ocean. So, I think if you look at things from a sensible perspective, you can see that out. Now, and our people were sensible. They weren't silly. When you uproot yourselves and you're going out looking for somewhere to live or to populate, or, it's not just Christopher Columbus who's a great explorer. The greatest explorer I know is Maui, because he's on every island. They all talk of Maui. Maui fished up this island, Maui fished up that island. Maui's the great navigator. And that's the truth. He was. He went out and did things, back when the gods, and this is where you got to, breathe a little bit of more practicality into this. He's so far back, he's become a god to us, or a demigod. And his exploits are all in what we call, what I can't remember who it was, called quaint stories that we tell. But each of those stories, if you look at them, are very true gatherings of knowledge that are told in stories that will interest our kids. Now, I'm being on course here, but anyway, so I'm taking on a little bit too much time on this part. So eventually they zigzagged across the Pacific and they made it into Marquesas. And then within 300-400 years they had the Kumara and had populated all of central Polynesia. And then they did a couple of things. They veered off to Hawaii and they veered southwest to New Zealand. And why did they do that? Because they were always going eastward. They found this huge ass continent. Okay, well, I don't want to go there again. There were some dangerous things over there, but we put some nice clay there. And they could grow it in the islands. And it proliferated, and so it became a staple diet for them. So, or perhaps they did go back, I don't know. Somebody asked me, did any of our canoes go around Cape Horn? Is it? That's the one down the bottom there, isn't it? Well, who knows? They may have. Getting back to what I'm supposed to be talking about. So you can actually see that they by the time of Christ, they're gone everywhere. And then they started doing some more exploration. Because one of the things that we discussed when we talk about why did they actually go up to Hawaii, why did they come down to Aotearoa, it's about listening to the stories that we tell. Paikea wrote down here on the way. Paikea followed the migrational path of Hawaii to Aotearoa. You tell the story the way you want your children to remember. And so the story of Paikea riding down on his way to Aotearoa is, to someone who says, it's a thing, that's one of those way out stories that must be obviously a legend. But the reality is that he followed the migrational paths of the whales. And Tāki Tumuwaka had a Hawkeye, Tūtarakauika was his name. Same thing, following the migration. Tūtarakauika was the first child of Tangaroa, a whale. And they followed these migrational paths. Now, you might ask, well, following whales is one thing, but is that the catalyst that would make them choose a pathway different to what they were used to doing? Maybe not. The other thing that we know of in terms of migration is the migration of birds. So when you're up in the islands and the kuaka, what's that? Godward. Is that the name of that one? Yeah. Cup flies in, settles on your island, feeds itself up, and then flies off down southeast, in a southwest direction, or in a southerly direction, or wherever they happen to land on. And they always, they know they land on the different islands, and then they fly off, and they come down south. So if the whales are going in that direction, the birds are going in that direction, let's go down there. Oops, bump into an island, a rather big one, and Kupe gives us some instructions when he gets home. So, yeah, that's in light, I suppose, a way of looking at how our ancestors populated the Pacific. They were in tune with their environment. They were in tune with their environment. I only know one person that I've known for a very short time that was anywhere near what we expect our Jupiter must be like, Mopio. But he was Micronesian. And Micronesian stopped as Micronesian, probably because these big guys had already pinched the rest of the Pacific. The Micronesians aren't, they're not really huge guys, but Polynesians are quite big. One of my ancestors was 7 feet tall, or so I'm told. But Mopio was so in tune with the environment that he lived in. The first voyage I went on, he sailed with us in 1992 to Rarotonga. Now that voyage had a lot of things that we prefer to forget in terms of we weren't really that experienced, and we weren't experienced enough really to even attempt a 2,000-mile ocean voyage, but we did. And we went out there, we did a lot of things wrong, but at least we had somebody on board that taught us what we should have been doing. Now when I say that, we trained for 6 months in Doubtless Bay for a 2,000-mile voyage on the ocean. 6 months travelling across. The entrance to Doubtless Bay is only like 10 miles across. So we we did that zigzag thing. We zigzagged to one side and we zigzagged to the other side. Spent 6 months doing that. And we believed that was enough to prepare us for a deep ocean voyage. Well, no, right, we did go out of the bay once to get some kina around the other side of Karikari Point. And then we sailed back and it went dark. And oh my God, you should have heard us. Hey bro, it's getting really dark out here now. Can you see where Monganui is? And I'm going, oh, I don't know which one of those lights is Monganui. You know, and we were getting all anxious about sailing back into Monganui. What the hell were we doing going out on the ocean? But we went out there. 5 little storms later, well, one was a big one, the first one. 5 storms later, we made it to Rarotonga. We had to get towed a little bit here and there because basically the craft that we were on probably wasn't set up in the best way it possibly could have been. But one thing that we did do, we grew up in that time, and we became determined to learn how to do it properly. And I think that's the difference. You know, you go through an exercise to voyage from Aotearoa to Rarotonga, and in that time you make so many mistakes along the way that you have to learn from them. And those experiences that we had just made us more determined to actually get out there and do it properly. And Mo Piaru, I know this is a long way around to actually describing Mo and his affinity with the ocean, but Mo was this guy in the middle of that first storm. I remember trying to go to sleep under a compromised tenting system that we had. It had all ripped up, and you know there was openings everywhere. Open ocean was before us, you know. So we're trying to hide away towards that storm. My first one, 7 days into our voyage. And here I'm hiding on a hedge cover because my mate, who's in my bunk, who's supposed to be on duty at that time, is sick and is violently ill in our bunk. And so I couldn't push him out. So I went and found another place to sleep, hiding away from the storm. And at the height of the storm, this huge swell comes up, lifts the waka up like this. And all I can remember is falling out of the hatch. I was on the top side, fell out onto the deck to come down again. I thought we were going to drown because I thought the waka was capsizing. And then I'm on my hands and knees crawling around on the deck, probably screaming my nut off or something, I don't know. I can't actually remember that. I'd like to be more manly and say I wasn't. But I can't actually tell you with any real truth in it that I wasn't screaming my nut off. I like to think I wasn't, but hey. But anyway, all I remember is looking up into this calm, serene face. Mo Piaru. He happened to be sitting there with a good friend of ours, Clay Biddle, and they had this bottle between them. There was a flask bottle with rākea in it. Rākea is, I call it, I took it out moonshine. And we had it on board for medicinal purposes, of course. Anyway, Mo's sitting there, he's got this calm, serene face. I'm looking into his eyes, there's no sign of fear. I think mine must have been about this huge. And I'm looking up in his face and I'm just thinking to myself, oh my God, I want to be like him. And he goes and pours me a cap and he says, you want some? And I go, yes please. And I scoot over and I'm down the thing, I'm warmed up. And I know they say, you know, alcohol's no good for hypothermia and all that sort of, but I had enough padding on me to not worry about that side. But I had this and it warmed me up, but it, you know, and it calmed me down. And I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to carry on doing this, I've got to be like him. You know, we get home and we get to Rarotonga and we come home. It's a lot easier trip on the way home, except for the last 5 days. 3 days on the edge of a cyclone. And never been in anything so terrifying. Well, first time was more terrifying because it wasn't the first time. But 3 days in a cyclone where you've got 60, 70 miles an hour winds, gusts over 100 miles an hour, towering seas. Hope there's nobody coming sailing with me here because I don't want to scare you. Towering seas, and 3 days in that. You know, after the first day, you get a bit blasé about it all because nothing happens to you. You know, we happen to be doing things right, and we come out of that and we get home and we learn a lot from it. But it also puts it in mind of the fact that I'm in there with my wet weather gear on, got all this warm clothing on underneath, and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, my ancestors sailed down here in that type of weather, and what are they like? Nowhere near the amount of warm clothing that I was wearing at that particular time. You know? So you've got to think about it. Our ancestors were a hardy breed of people. And they, you know, I look at it, I just need to say one more thing in terms of this. I look at that and I think to myself, man, we're not even anywhere near close to emulating what our ancestors did. But it does open up your mind to what it must have been like. And when you look at that, you know, I take immense pride in just believing that our ancestors didn't bump into islands. They didn't just, you know, decide to go off on the Americas and accidentally find land. They did it deliberately. Now, and the reason why I say, this is the last bit, I think I haven't got much more time. But, yeah. And they did this deliberately, and the reason I know this, I had this argument with one of my uncles. He was telling me, there were 100 people on our waka. Our waka was like 180 feet long to carry all those people. And I go, no, it wasn't uncle. And he goes, yes, it was. And I said, no, I've been out there, I can tell you, 180 foot long waka, in between some of those huge shoals, I see, we'll go like this, crack. And I said, so I don't think it was that long. And 100 people? No. And he says, now, and he's getting really angry when I said, no, I don't mean that there weren't 100 people on the waka. I just don't mean that they were all on the waka at the one time. They did multiple trips on board. That's actually way more, you know, that's way more advantageous to us believing in our ancestors' ability than thinking that they came down on some enormous waka because it's best, you know, that sort of thing. But they actually did it on smaller craft, but did it multiple times. You know, you think about it like that, and it becomes even more amazing. And you get more pride from that, because you know that absolutely it wasn't accidental, it was deliberate, and they were, to me, the greatest explorers on the planet. I go back to Christopher Columbus, my last word. His crew thought he was mad because he was going to sail off the edge of the world. And he was mad. All right, mate.